Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today, we are both very excited to be talking to you about a brand new film that we saw together in the theater over the holiday, Godzilla Minus One.
Godzilla Minus One.
Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. This is very brief from IMDb, so we might have to get into the story a little bit on our own. But the synopsis from IMDb is: post-war Japan is at its lowest point when a new crisis emerges in the form of a giant monster baptized in the horrific power of the atomic bomb. And this is probably the last time I'm going to try to the first and last time I'm going to try to pronounce names. The director is Takashi Yamazaki, and it stars Minami Hamabe. I'm not going to try this name. I'm not going to pronounce any names.
We don't speak Japanese.
We don't
folks.
speak Japanese. All right. So this was, I want to say, this is probably the first time that we got to see a movie in the movie theater together, probably since the 1980s. I can't think of a time
That's right.
since then. So what did you think? Oh, first we want to say brand new movie, and we will spoil this. So if it is still playing in your area, this is a movie to see on the biggest screen that you can find. So
I agree.
if you want to watch it first and then listen to what we have to say, I would recommend that.
And we do spoil. We're going to talk all about it, so be warned. So to your question, what did I think of it? Well, I mean, we've talked about it a lot, so you know what I think of it. But I loved it. I am not a Godzilla fan. Like, it just never the entire. I'm not really a Kaiju fan. There's been a lot of Godzilla movies coming out, I feel like, in the last 10 years, maybe slightly longer. Certainly American cinema has tried to reinvent that property and breathe new life into it. And I kind of feel like each one is worse than the last. There have been some that are a little better than others, but I'm just not excited by a giant lizard destroying a city, whether it's Tokyo or New York or LA or a giant lizard fighting a giant ape or a giant lizard fighting a giant moth. Like, I don't care. This movie, however, really made it feel fresh to me. Really, of course, if it's got Godzilla in the title, the assumption is this is an action movie about a giant lizard that destroys everything. In watching this film, there are action sequences. It does tick the boxes. You do get to see Godzilla destroying Tokyo. You get to see mobs of terrified people fleeing for their lives before the onslaught of Godzilla. You get to see Godzilla firing his atomic heat ray, or her. We don't really establish. We don't spend a ton of time with Godzilla in this movie.
No.
To say it's a drama is a little disingenuous, but it really follows a central character who is a kamikaze pilot. And one of the things I loved about the movie, and there are many, is that it really underscores the idea of Godzilla as a metaphor. And what precisely Godzilla is a metaphor for is sort of a little bit open-ended. I don't think you have to put it in a single box. But I think that really, that's what I've been missing, is it's not, but it's a Godzilla movie that's not about the literal giant lizard. It's about the metaphorical giant lizard. And you get to have your cake and eat it too, right? You get to enjoy the big destruction scenes, which I think are done really well. But you also get to have this wonderful character development and terrific writing and scenes between characters that you come very quickly to care about, and how this is all affecting them. And in the marriage of those two things is that this giant lizard becomes a metaphor for other stuff that is destroying / profoundly affecting the characters' lives, right? And it's not just about what do we do about the giant lizard. Oh, the giant lizard is here. Oh, where did the giant lizard come from? What does the giant lizard want? Those things are irrelevant. And I think if a giant monster was attacking the city, you wouldn't psychoanalyze it. Right?
Mhm. Yeah.
All you could do is respond to it, which I think is part of the point of the, kaiju. It represents the atomic bomb, or America, or whatever name you want to put on it. It's this powerful thing that's destroying your life, and you can gnash your teeth and say, oh, did I cause this? Is this about me? Or all the things that a human being would do in a time of crisis, but you'd basically be concerned for running for your life. Like,
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a long monologue. What did you think of it?
So I think we probably here at some point ought to get more in depth in the story. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I haven't I would say I've never been a gigantic Godzilla fan either. And the newer American movies have my probably biggest pet peeve with blockbuster type movies is, oh, it's just turn your brain off, it's a giant lizard, blah, blah, blah. And I get that, it's a giant lizard. But what they do with this film is, and you talked about it being, that it's sort of a drama, but not exactly a drama. So we have this opening scene where the main character, he's with other so basically it's like if I recall correctly, they're Japanese soldiers, they're on an island, and I think they don't know the war is over yet. Is that right? Is that how it goes? Or is it actually during the war when
I think it's right at the end.
Okay.
So I think it is in sort of, whether or not they know the war is over is a little bit irrelevant. They get that the war is lost.
Yeah.
And whether or not there's been a declaration of concession is a little bit irrelevant. But if I remember correctly, it's kind of up in the air.
But so our main character's on this island with these other soldiers, and we get into the action right away because they're there. Godzilla shows up. Godzilla looks very different than what we are kind of used to him looking like initially in the movie. He almost kind of looked like a T-Rex to me, but this is before he's been really, changed or transformed by the nuclear energy or whatever. So He is a fighter pilot he was a kamikaze pilot who had, um, he got scared and didn't follow through with his kamikaze mission. And then there's a second time here with Godzilla where they have the plane on the ground, and he gets in the cockpit to shoot at Godzilla, and he freezes up, and all the other soldiers except for one guy, uh, they all die. So it's just these two guys who are left alive, and the other soldier then, of course, blames him for not saving these guys. He goes back to, I guess it's Tokyo, and and everything is destroyed, and he finds out that his parents are dead, and then he runs into this young woman with a baby, and he takes her in, and then we kind of go from there. And after that initial, we had that really cool scene, and you leaned over to me in the theater and said, "This is effing awesome," which I felt exactly the same way with the Godzilla stuff. But then we get into the drama part, and it's really heavy. Then you have another, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, maybe more, before we really get back into the Godzilla stuff, and it's pretty serious drama stuff with him dealing with all this grief of his family has died, and he feels like he was a coward by not going through with his duty and everything. And now he is taking care of this woman and this baby who she wants to have a relationship with him, but he doesn't really want to because he feels like he's a coward. And all of that is really well written and really well acted. And this is what so much of the time we're missing now with these blockbuster kind of movies. And I hope that Hollywood studies this and learns the right lessons from this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
On the other hand, I mean, the kind of Hollywood stuff, this was a $15 million budget, and the effects in this are amazing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. You told me it was a $15 million movie, and I believe you, but I don't believe you. Right? It's just like, no.
It's CG, but it looks great. And I mean, so we have the drama and everything, but with Godzilla itself, I don't know if, like you said, is it a male or female? I don't know. There were times in this, Godzilla is actually scary. And there were times where there's things where he's destroying things in the city and people are hanging, from ledges and all this kind of thing, where I was getting legit anxiety in the theater at some of this. They just do a really great job with all of the, I don't know if carnage is the right word, because there's not really a lot of blood in this, but just things falling apart and the camera swooping around and all of that. So I'm kind of rambling now, but I just feel like this is the way these kind of big budget action movies should be done, and this is the best one of these that I can recall seeing in a long time.
Yeah. What's engaging about watching giant robots turn into cars and planes and tanks and back again if I don't care? Right?
Yeah.
If I don't care about the characters, whether they're one of the giant robots or one of the people being threatened by one of the giant robots, right? Why do I care about a movie if there isn't character development and story development and in ways that are engaging to me as an audience? I have to empathize, or else it's just a whirling dervish of computer generated imagery and looks cool, but is simultaneously boring.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is absolutely the problem with a lot of these big budget things, is it almost feels like it was written by an AI that doesn't understand human. It's like, and when we go back to the first, reboot or whatever of the Transformers movie with Megan Fox and Shia LaBeouf, I think Megan Fox and Shia LaBeouf are compelling enough on screen that you do get attached to those characters.
Mm-hmm.
But, the big action sequences of those things are still focused on the whirling dervish. They're just focused on the look what I can do of the CGI, and you stop caring. you stop caring in those moments. There's one scene from that movie that sticks with me, and Shia LaBeouf is in one of the Transformers as a car, speeding along, and there's a big melee going on, and they go boom, and it goes flying into the air, and the robot changes out of its car form into its robot form, and Shia LaBeouf sort of flies free, and the camera follows him sailing through the air.
Mhm.
The robot does whatever it's doing. I completely forget which robot it was. It's probably Optimus Prime. I don't know. And I forget what it does in its robot form, but then it sort of catches up to him and transforms back into a car around him. But the camera stays with Shia LaBeouf. And I'm like, the camera stays with the character.
Mhm.
That's why you care. And that's what I remember. I'm probably misremembering it. I don't know. But my point is, I agree with you 100%. And I want to pick apart a few of the little things that you sort of touched on there. The our lead is a kamikaze pilot, right? And the kamikaze pilots, apparently, I'm not a history expert here, but from what I gather from the movie, the Emperor of Japan ordered them to basically suicide bomb American ships, right?
Mhm.
Because that's the die with honor. Basically, turn yourself into a missile and kill as many of the enemy as possible. I think what we gather from the pilot, but also the engineers that he meets on the island, are kind of like, well, that's fruitless. That's futile, right? And the engineer that he lands ostensibly because, oh, there's something wrong with my plane, right? And they look it over and they're like, yeah, it's really interesting because there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with your plane. But he's not being a total dick about it.
Mhm.
He's sort of kind of like, look, I get it. What's the point of wasting a good plane and wasting your life? Like, we lost, you know?
Mhm.
And yet, like that, those are the orders. So that's, I think throughout you get this schism of like what I'm supposed to do or what is the honorable thing to do and what makes sense. Like, so almost immediately he gets in his plane that's got the biggest gun, and Godzilla walks right in front of him. And he, and actually even looks at him, and he doesn't fire the gun because in that moment, my interpretation of it is, well, that's not going to do anything, right?
Mhm.
I mean, this gun is not going to kill it. Bullets are bouncing right off of it. And if
Mhm.
I shoot it, it's just going to turn and eat me. So he doesn't, and then it proceeds to kill everybody. But the engineer, the guy that shows up throughout the rest of the movie. That person blames him later, and he blames himself for see, you are a coward. You didn't do what you're supposed to do and stop this thing from happening to all of us. However, we all know that wouldn't have made any difference at all.
Mhm.
Right. So this guilt for me, Godzilla almost, and he later in the film, he doesn't explicitly say this, but it's pretty clear. It was pretty clear in watching it to me that he kind of thinks that he made Godzilla happen personally. Like
Yeah.
Godzilla is somehow punishment for his dereliction of duty, for his cowardice, right? If only I had done the honorable thing and none of this would have happened. If only I had shot it when I had a chance, none of this would have happened, right? And I actually think that Godzilla as a metaphor, I mean, it doesn't square because Godzilla does destroy a city. It's probably
Mhm.
a better metaphor for the nuclear bomb, which
Mhm.
otherwise isn't mentioned at all in this film, right?
Right.
There's no talk of the United States bombing Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It's just
Mhm.
there is talk of the Americans, but it's their rising conflict with the Russians and the sort of global destabilization that's causing. But glaringly obvious from the American point of view is the fact that we dropped 2 nukes on Japan. What
Yeah.
we get instead is Godzilla. So to me, this city destroying, like, what do you do in the face of this? The metaphor is probably most clearly the nuke. But I think it's actually even more compelling to look at through this guy's eyes and this is retribution. This is what happens when I don't do my duty.
Mhm.
because it's all throughout the movie, and his neighbors accuse him of it, and he sort of redeems himself in the eyes of his neighbors by being a good surrogate father and a good surrogate husband and a good person and doing his best, but he can't forgive himself. You know,
Yeah.
he can't forgive himself, and again and again, Godzilla sort of shows up at his darkest low points, or when he feels like, oh, I should do the quote unquote honorable thing here, but I'm not going to. I'm going to make the quote unquote selfish choice, and Godzilla shows up. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you think about that interpretation of it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely so definitely the original Godzilla from the 1950s is, all about Japan being destroyed, and it's definitely that allegory, as you said. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of things going on in this movie, and there's probably some cultural things even that maybe we might miss. But there's a lot in this about how these people are kind of broken after the war, and these men coming back and being uh sort of broken in general. There's a really interesting so we haven't talked yet about the so the main character, he gets a job on a boat, and it's very Jaws like, where, and all the characters in this I thought are so, you like the character so much, but he's on this ship with one guy's a scientist, and then I forget what the other guy's job is, but another guy is young, and he missed out on being in the war, and that's all he wishes he could have fought, and he wants a chance to fight and everything. And there's a scene of right at the end of the movie, or towards the end of the movie, where the scientist and whatever the other guy is are with the young guy, and he's lamenting that he didn't get to go and fight, and one of them says, I'm just paraphrasing the line, but something about that it's better to have not fought at all.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting. This has this kind of anti-war message
Yeah.
to it as well, but I don't think I'm answering your question directly.
No.
But yeah,
But
I definitely
the
think
senselessness of war, right?
Yeah.
The senselessness of it all. Like, what was Japan going to do? Conquer the world? Like, why are we? It was an isolationist country for a long time, hundreds of years at least, and then they got involved in this war, and now look what's happened. Whether it's America or the giant monster, but all of our men are dead, right? Our entire country's destroyed. He comes back. His parents are gone, and Tokyo is just a shambles. Like, it's literally a shanty towns, all that's left of I think it's Tokyo that he comes back to, where he
I think
goes
so,
back
yeah.
to his and I think that's woven all throughout. That's very much the fabric of the tapestry of this movie, is the senselessness of all of this, and these decisions being made at at the very highest levels that have, like, ordering people to become kamikaze pilots, die with honor, right? And it's like, why? Like, no. For what?
And you even have that in the what's going on in the movie now, where they come up with this plan for how they're going to stop Godzilla, and they have a general or whatever who's, and the guys on the boat find out that their scientist friend, who's just like this regular guy, was actually this bigwig, you know uh top scientist. And
Yeah,
they hatch this plan, and they get a bunch of men together, and a lot of them are pretty reluctant. They're like, hey, we already fought once, and like, we don't
exactly.
have
You want
anything
us
now.
to go back out there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I thought I think there's just a lot in this that you would not see in the American version of this movie, where
right,
the American version of this movie, everybody's going to be a hero. There's not going to be anybody who's going to be like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that.
right.
And so I just thought that was, this movie has, at the end of the day, it's a big Godzilla, big lizard, and there's still some schmaltzy things with this and everything,
Sure.
but there's more depth to this than what you typically expect to see in a movie like
Way
this.
more depth. Way more depth. I mean, so he gets on the little Jaws boat, right? It's a little rickety wooden boat. That's a laugh moment.
Mhm.
You go, this is the special boat to blow up the mines. It looks like a little, Popeye tug putt, and then they all kind of, so there's that moment of like, wah, 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 I'm gonna die in this thing. But then they explain it to him. It's like, well, you can't have a metal boat because the mines are magnetic, right? So you got to have a wooden boat, and the you get a kind of a fun comic book moment when you realize the crew is basically the salty captain, right, who talks big and blustery and tough as nails, and then the
He's
sort of first
Flint,
mate who's this kid who wish he'd gone to war, and he's young and he's eager, and right, and there's that trope, and then the sort of egghead, right, with the floppy hair and the scientist and adjusting his glasses, and he's like, oh, elementary, and he's kind of that quirky guy, and then the gunner who is this pilot. That's what he's gonna do. They're gonna spot the mine. He's gonna shoot the mine and blow it up at a distance, and that's how they clear the mines. And it's like, now they got their team of 4. They're gonna head out in their little putt boat, and they're gonna do this, right? So you get that, a crack team of, a unit to blow up the mines. But as soon as we establish that, and that clicks into that satisfying part of your brain that needs to categorize everything, they start developing relationships, right? And the relationship between the kid and the captain is more complicated than it first appears, and the scientist is more complicated than he first appears, and everything is more complicated than it first appears. And other than that surface level of like, you know what this is? This is the buddy. 4 buddies on a boat, solving the mission. As soon as you establish that for the satisfying, salty taste of it, it immediately begins to unpack and go onto the surface. So I think overall the whole movie is very show don't tell, right? It's very show you how they feel. We're explicating it now, but watching the movie isn't a lot of blah blah blah, and other Godzilla movies tend to get right into that. Well, what is it? Well, it's a mutant because when they blew up the whatever nuke on the Bikini Atoll, it mutated a gecko into a Gila monster, or a Komodo dragon into it. Godzilla is
You don't need any
about
of that.
where right.
Yeah.
Godzilla is about the fact that it's this giant thing that is leveling the city that you can't do anything about, right? It's stepping on people. It's knocking over buildings with its tail. And oh my God, it shoots this kind of nuke ray from its mouth. Like this thing just keeps getting worse, right? And you're so concerned with like, you barely even get to what are we going to do about it because you're so concerned with like, get out of its way, that you don't ever have time to think, where did this thing come from, right? It's like that is way down the priority list. And I love that the movie stays away from that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's really fantastic. And then we meet, so he comes back and there's a neighbor that condemns him for his cowardice. And then he sort of, in very short order, bumps into a young woman with a kid. He presumes that she's the mother of the child, as we all do. And she's sort of she stole something, I think, and she sort of abandons the kid. And he can't leave this little baby girl alone, so he goes and picks it up. And then she shows back up and she's like, why didn't you just leave it? Why did you pick up the kid? And he's like, what are you talking about? I can't just leave a baby.
Yeah.
And so she sort of moves in with him, and it turns out that the baby is not her daughter at all. That that I don't remember if somebody sort of abandoned the baby with her, or
I think
she saw the parents killed.
I think somebody just left the baby somewhere, and she took it. I think I could be wrong on that, but I think she just sort of found it like on a bench or something.
Very, very quickly, we've got a little family unit, right? Very, very quickly, we've got mom, dad, and baby. And none of them are any relation to each other than the fact that they're utterly bereft from the war. And there's no romantic. I mean, I think in most movies you'd see at least one scene where there starts to be some sort of chemistry between them and they fall in love. We don't get any of that in this movie. They do fall in love, but it happens almost despite, it's more about this character's PTSD, this character being the lead, the male lead, than it is about he sort of realizes late there isn't traditional romance,
No.
right? And we see that she has come to. I guess I don't know where I'm going with this. It's a non-traditional cinema vision of marriage and family, where the
Yeah, very
primary
much so.
thing, and it's not making statements about polygamy or any crap like that. It's just like in a situation like this where everyone has lost everything, you cling on to what you've got, right? And all of these other characters are kind of like, this is really special. And he's like, well, but it's not. And then that doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter
Mhm.
how it came to be. You've got something really special here in the relationship you have to this woman and this child, right? And the child, of course, thinks of him as a father, and he keeps being like, "I'm not your father." And they look at him, his friends from the boat, they're like, "Shut up, dude!" Like,
Yeah.
you may not have you took him into your house. You're the dad. Like, that's what
Right.
you're doing here. And it's just so much more interesting than trying to make everything fit into the fairy tale roles, right? Because
Yeah,
we get to
absolutely.
explore the complicated things that feel like real life. And again, this is a Godzilla movie. So
Mhm.
it was just a great
You
movie with wonderful relationships and stakes
we
and
we went into it and everything I had read and seen about this, everybody was just like, "It's great. This movie
yeah.
is excellent." And I looked on Rotten Tomatoes; it's a 98% from critics, and it's a 98% from viewers. And we're standing in the line, to get our ticket, and you said, "Could this really be as good as what everybody's saying
It's
it is?"
impossible.
Yeah, and you're just sitting there. You're just sitting there thinking, "Wow, this is a Godzilla movie, and it has more depth than probably some dramas, that I've seen lately."
Yeah. You
Um,
said, "Hey, there's the new Godzilla movie," and I said, "Pass."
mhm,
I said, "I just don't. I don't. I'm not even. I don't. I don't. I'm not interested." And then you started being like, "Well, it's 98?"
mhm,
You said, "Well, it's 98% Rotten Tomatoes," and I was even like, "Oh, but that's a strong fan base. Audiences are going to like it." And what do the critics say? 98. And that's weird. That's very unusual. So I was like, "Well," and then I watched the trailer, and I was like, "Actually, it looks pretty good." But it took me I fought it. Like, it took me a long time to come around to being interested in spending my time watching a Godzilla movie. It's a Japanese film. It's a $15 million Godzilla movie, right? Which should be an oxymoron right there. So it's Japanese language with English subtitles, right? It's got
mhm,
a 98% audience score and a 98% critic score. This movie shouldn't be possible. It's like
mhm,
almost if you just said, look, it's a $500,000 Godzilla movie, and sure, it's low budget, but it's great. I would have had an easier time believing that.
mhm.
But at the 15 million mark, you cross so many other people. I feel like, at least in the studio system, have gotten involved that you kind of get the worst of both worlds. It's not enough money to make something really big budget, but it's enough money that everybody wants to tell you what to do and change everything, right? So you just kind of get screwed. You don't have enough money to make it look spectacular, but it's enough money that everybody, is gonna not think it tastes right until they piss in it, basically.
Yeah.
But this is just quite the opposite. It feels like a completely indie movie where the director got to do whatever he or she wanted. I don't know who directed. I really.
Yeah, he's I said his name here, but I
But I
would
mean, I
like to
don't know
look
anything
into
about him or his
No, no, no.
work. But my
And I don't
point
know
is, like,
anything.
but it is it looks good enough that you don't believe it's a $15 million movie.
Oh,
A
sure.
$150 million movie, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, what did this
A-
cost? 150. You'd be like, okay. But if
And
15, it just doesn't. The CGI doesn't even seem possible for
and
that.
and I don't know anything about the Japanese. You froze up. Oh, you froze up there for a second. I don't know anything about the Japanese movie business really, but it's all on the money's all on the screen and more. So you kind of have to wonder what the structure must be very different than here, where we talked about when we did uh The Killer for Netflix, and what was the budget on that? 175 million. We're just like, where did there's not a lot of effects in that. I mean, there are effects, and it's just like, where did and it's like, give this guy $175 million, and what would he do? I mean, it would be unbelievable.
Exactly. Like,
So
he
they
could make
must be,
12 movies for that money. Like,
yeah. So it must be whatever all the stuff, they're wasting money on here, catering and all this kind of stuff. They must not be doing in Japan.
well, I do think that I don't know. Again, like you, we don't know anything about how movies get made in Japan. But when you make a movie here, there are unions, and I think that it's good that there are unions that can be trades. And that is a big part of inflating budgets here,
Hmm.
is just making sure that everybody gets paid at a certain standard. And I love independent films,
Sure.
right? And I love the kind of hand to mouth, hard scrabble, steal whatever shots you can steal to get that vibe. I love the scrappiness of independent film, but having produced independent movies, it is a constant heartache that everybody involved deserves better. Like, they deserve to get paid well for all the hard work they do, so I don't begrudge that. But even so, The Killer being 175 million and this being 15 that's just such a wild discrepancy. This has got a dinosaur that destroys cities and ships at sea. Like, just filming the guys in the boat. If you said it's 15 million and we're going to take Godzilla out of it, and it's guys in the boat, and it's post-war Tokyo that's all bombed out, like, just the sets and getting, extras. And I think you get to 15 million just making this movie look as good as it does without Godzilla in it.
Oh yeah. I mean, just to have a movie where not even on the boat, just have the people in their homes and stuff. You know what I mean? $15 million you know, would probably not touch it. And I get what you're saying about the union and everything, but presumably everybody involved with this was paid. You know what I mean? So it's not like they
Yeah,
worked.
presumably.
It's not like everybody worked for free.
Yeah, and I don't. Again, we don't know from Japanese cinema, but I don't know if these are I don't know if these are sort of, here, if you're going to put, Brad Pitt in a movie, you're spending $20 million on Brad Pitt, just
Yeah.
having Brad Pitt be in the movie. So you say, well, the budget's 100 million. 20% of that is your lead.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. So I mean, I think if you're using no-name actors, the risk with that is that A, you don't get the audience that just shows up to see the actor they're familiar with, but B, you might not get, Brad Pitt's not just a pretty face, he's great at what he does.
Oh, sure.
So I think the performances in Godzilla Minus One are absolutely fantastic. And again, it's not in my first language. I'm reading subtitles, but you could watch this with the sound off and you would get what's going on between the characters.
Yeah. For sure.
Terrific acting. Even the baby girl is great. And she gets to be like 2, and she's great. The directing of so you have to say that's the director. That's great casting, so that you get people that are really going to show up. And she's fantastic, he is fantastic, the guys on the boat are fantastic. The at the end, the scene where the general or the admiral or whatever comes and tries to inspire, he's like, the reason you're all here is that you're the only people that really are left that know how to, basically, we need to pilot these ships, we need to confront Godzilla at sea, so we need seamen like you to make this possible, and I can't order you to do it. it has to be a volunteer thing. This is just there's nobody else but us. Nobody else is coming up with a plan. We gotta if we don't stop Godzilla, who will, right? And the guys kind of come around, so everybody in that scene is great. Everybody is great.
Yeah, there's not a poor performance in the whole thing, and it's a shame because this movie has done well. It's I just checked while we were talking here. It's 86 million worldwide on a $15 million budget. So I'm sure there'll be another one of these. And I we joked when we talked about I brought this up to you watching it. I thought it was called Godzilla Plus One, which is completely different. I don't really know what the title Godzilla Minus One means.
Godzilla shows up at a wedding, but but the date he brings with him really causes waves.
Yeah, but it's a shame because this is a movie that I think has a ton of universal appeal. If you'd say to people, "Hey, there's a new Godzilla movie," and people are like, "Nah, I don't think so," and it's Japanese and it's subtitled, I'm out. I'm not gonna, So there's just a lot of people that will never see this.
Yeah,
but I think, I think this could appeal to lots and lots of people who wouldn't necessarily typically be into this kind of thing, just because there's, it's kind of like an old fashioned, I need to get different references, but I always come back to the Jurassic Park and, and those kind of things, and how, Spielberg probably better than anybody maybe ever in filmmaking, maybe James Cameron, but knows how to appeal to everybody basically. And this is that kind of movie where it has, you have Godzilla biting people's heads off and all that kind of stuff. So you have that for the people that like the horror aspect, but you have this real drama and depth and characters that you like that I just think is so rare in what we see now in and you would almost like to see an American remake of this, just like beat for beat remake, because more people would see it. But I think an American version, they would cut out all the stuff that makes it good.
Yeah, I don't know. And I also think there's something very Japanese about this story and about the concept of Godzilla that I think has never translated. You have Bryan Cranston talking about it. It's just,
I did like that. I liked that one, and that was actually a foreign director. I think he's Mexican or Spanish who did that. But then they went away from that with the next one was just terrible, just awful.
I remember what I remember about that movie is it I don't remember it very well. I remember that the trailer is all about Bryan Cranston, and Bryan Cranston dies in the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
Sorry, spoilers for people who don't. And I felt that was like, because it was the height of Breaking Bad or right afterwards, and I couldn't get enough of Bryan Cranston, and I was like, that's it. That's all I got. That's a bait and switch. But what really set it up as a disaster movie, like the world is ending, the climate is collapsing, a meteor's going to hit the earth, aliens are invading. It's something like that, and it's just sort of like this. What do we do? Even Contagion, like what do we do in the face of this impending doom, right? And then there's some, I don't even remember if they beat Godzilla in it or not, but the whole movie is framed as a disaster movie. It's like, well, what do you do when it becomes clear we're not going to make it through this one? And this movie is not that.
No.
It's so hard for me to explain adequately that Godzilla is almost incidental to this Godzilla movie. And it's also Godzilla porn, right? You also get the satisfaction of the giant feet at the foot, the crowds running away from him, the giant Godzilla feet stomping people flat, the tail knocking over buildings, the nuclear heat ray, they call it, or atomic ray or whatever, that it shoots out of its mouth and creates a mushroom cloud
popping up out of his back, and they turn blue and glow and everything.
He picks up a train car. Our heroine is dangling. All the people fall out of the train car like, crumbs shaken out of a can. You get all of that. action movie, kaiju, great, satisfying stuff that I think Godzilla fans must love.
Yeah.
But it's not a movie about Godzilla.
No.
It's a movie about these characters. I can't. You have to see it. Like, I can't land on what a coup that is, and then the fact that you're like, well, and it was just $15 million is like a magic trick. It's like, and I fit this entire city into VW. And you're like, that's
Yeah, yeah.
impossible. That's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a movie is a magic trick.
And that's why these other, so like I said, whatever year that was, 2017 or something like that, the Bryan Cranston came out. I did like it. And then the next one, they just went super cornball with it. And, you have these characters that they're all cartoon cutout, and you don't care anything about them.
Right.
So then you're just left with, I'm just waiting to see Godzilla step on somebody or knock down a building or whatever, and that's not enough for you want to enjoy a movie, in my opinion. And
well, we do lose characters in this movie, and it's incredibly painful. So I think the other pitfall that sometimes movies fall into is they develop interesting characters about whom we care, and then they're like Teflon. They're like superheroes. Like nothing can kill them, right? And I think that one of the things, like, for example, about the Walking Dead series that I loved is you couldn't get attached to anybody because it would break your heart when that person got eaten, and it happened routinely. You're like, that show was a meat grinder. And I thought was one of the strengths of the show is you experience, like the people in the movie, this constant heartbreak of trying to survive in this post-apocalyptic world where everybody dies. So even people we see in the street get obliterated.
Yeah.
That we don't know. The movie carefully makes you care about them, right? You're hiding in an alley, and just before you see a woman get stomped on under Godzilla's foot, we don't know her. She's just a person. It humanizes her, right? She's screaming for her child, or she's looking around frantically because, her husband or her brother or whatever. There's just a moment before she gets squished. And it's not a gross, like, it's not one of those movies where the foot comes down and you see her eyeballs pop out. She just vanishes under the foot, right? So, I mean, it's you could take.
This isn't a gory movie.
It's PG-13 maybe, right? It's PG-13 because it's so emotionally distressing, not because it's graphically disgusting. But there's just a moment before she gets crushed where you powerfully empathize with her fear and helplessness. And so we see that again and again. You care about the loss of human life in this movie.
Yeah.
And all the way up to where we lose, I want to say mom, although she's, again, the wife. He witnesses her she pushes him out of the way and then is blown away in the onslaught. And I mean, I turned to you in the movie and I was like, I can't, I'm going to cry. Like, this is, I can't believe we lost her. That's,
more guilt for him. They just like pile on the guilt,
exactly.
him.
Exactly. It doubles down. And he's like, this is all my fault.
But they do, it's kind of a cake and eat it too thing where, I mean, this is a major, major spoiler, but you spend the rest, I don't know how much more, 45 minutes or something like that, thinking that she's dead. And then at the end, it turns out she's been in a hospital all along. That while, but it's very satisfying because you're like, oh, she's not dead.
Because it earns it, right? So it does the classic, oh, you get her back, which in most movies, you're like, you don't get her back, right? She doesn't get to be dead and not dead, guys. But this movie buys it. And so at the end, you internally roll your eyes a little bit like, of course, they let her be alive. But you're so genuinely happy that she's alive that you eat it. You're like, I don't care. Yeah. I'm so glad she's back. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you almost cry there,
great.
Like happy tears,
Absolutely.
There was one question that I had, and this is a pretty subtle thing, and I wondered what you thought about this. So after she, she's dead, and you have the neighbor who's this, older woman. I don't know how old she is, but, and, she's very mean to him when he comes back. She's like, you're a coward and a loser, and,
Right.
you're a kamikaze and you didn't come back. Well, once mom is out of the picture, then she moves in and, she's taking care of the little girl. And when he finds out, and they find out, I think, does he get a letter? I think he gets a letter saying that she's alive. But so the neighbor woman, there's a, it's very brief and subtle, but there's, she realizes, you as the viewer don't know that she's alive, I don't think. But he realizes it, and the neighbor lady realizes it, and she kind of grabs him and hits him, and I took it as she thought she's going to be the mom now, and she has realized that the mom is coming back, and you know what I'm talking about? Did you catch that?
I don't know that I had that precise interpretation of that moment, but I don't remember it very clearly.
But she
But I
kind of
mean, but it
you can tell
reinforces that it's show don't tell. It's
yeah.
we're not always 100% clear in any given moment why someone cares so much, and it feels very human because it's never just a single thing, right? Life is a dialectic that multiple apparently contradictory things can be true at the same time, right? So,
like I said, that was a pretty subtle thing, but she's clearly upset that he's gotten this letter, and you don't know why. And then when you see, that she's alive in the hospital, and so then, in hindsight, that I took that to be, it's like, okay, I don't get to, I'm not going to be. I go back to being, hey, maybe I'll take care of the baby once in a while, but I'm not going to be the real caretaker for this baby anymore.
yeah.
Which was another little, emotional thing that, if my interpretation was right.
No, but I think your interpretation is valid. Like, that's what I love about a complicated, true feeling movie like this, about real human relationships, is frequently she can be happy that the woman is still alive. She can be afraid that the woman is alive but maybe maimed, right? She can be afraid that this guy hasn't gotten over his PTSD enough to go get her,
Yeah.
And it can be fear that I'm not going to get to be basically the mother of this little girl anymore because what the woman that, so it can be all of that. And that's all very human and feels very true. And they don't sit and have a conversation about their feelings. They just express them in the moment. And it's complicated and it's kaleidoscopic. And I think the directing of this whole film nails that in the performances. I just thought it was absolutely great filmmaking.
Yeah. And another spoiler alert, Godzilla's not dead. We find, they go through the whole, their whole plan that they sink him to the bottom of the ocean. And then we see, he lights up, and, that's the end of the movie. So, and as, as well as this did, there's definitely going to be a sequel. I hope it's the same team of people that comes back, in terms of the presumably it'll be a different story, not these same characters. I don't know, but I hope it's the same director and production team and everything that comes back.
That's what's so funny. That's the kind of catch-22 of it, because, as an action movie, of course there's going to be a sequel. People want more of the same, right? But it's very hard to make a good movie that's more of the same, right? It's why you don't remake Psycho. Like, we already made Psycho. Why remake? You already did it, right? How is this possibly going to be better or even as good as the original? So then you think, okay, well, we've got a franchise here, which was really the whole point of leaving a kind of a, after the end so that we can make another one. But the real challenge is making a totally different movie that is also a sequel to the original. And sometimes people use an entirely different cast and an entirely different setting, and it's too different to feel like, a sequel to the first one. And then more often, I think what you get is a kind of rehashing of the things that focus grouped well from the first one, and they just try and make another blanket out of the cut up pieces of the first one, and it feels fundamentally unsatisfying because there's nothing really all that new added to it.
as great a movie as Jurassic Park is, I don't know how many Jurassic Park and
Right.
Jurassic World movies
It's a
there've been.
diminishing return. Yeah.
And Jurassic Park 2, Spielberg even came back for and directed,
Yeah.
and it's nowhere, none of them are anywhere near as good as the
Right.
original,
Right. So it's the paradox of a Godzilla movie this good is kind of like, well, of course, now studios are going to want to make a whole slew of Godzilla movies that audiences will flock to see. But this movie is really a one-off. Like,
Yeah.
all you can do in sequels is explain Godzilla and, make it more about Godzilla. And you don't get a second movie where Godzilla is just the sort of nameless metaphor that he is in this.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't float for over time either, right? I mean,
No.
the more you see a Godzilla, the more you learn about Godzilla, and that is precisely not the point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you're totally right. One thing that I was thinking about with this is, we don't really, this is our first episode recording in 2024, and we really don't do like year-end kind of stuff like that or anything. We haven't. And but uh and I was looking at the box office charts, and I out of the top 50 highest grossing movies, I saw 5 in the theater this year. And I mean, there would have been times in the past where maybe every movie in the top 20 I would have seen in the movie theater, So I don't know if that's just age or if it's just the movies that are being made or what, but so there's a lot that I didn't see this year. But I don't know that there was a movie that came out in 2023 that I enjoyed any more than this.
I haven't seen The Boy and the Crane, another Japanese, it's a Studio Ghibli movie that came out that was in the theater when we went, and I
walked
would
past the marquee for
like
it.
to see that very much. I'd love to see that in the theater too. But I mean, part of it is I just don't go out to the movies anymore. So I wait for things to come out on streamers, and it is a fundamentally different experience. But I don't know. 2023 has been such a strange, and I almost can't remember over the last 12 months. Like, was that a 2023 movie? But you're right. This one is fresh in my mind.
I don't think since the pandemic time has ever worked the same way it did in the past as what, but and again, I think this is I don't think this is me changing. I think it's just the movie business changing, where it's we just watched a Godzilla movie. So it's not like I want to just watch art house films, all the time. But it seems like so much of the time when I see, like, I just sent you the trailer for this new movie that's coming out called Lisa Frankenstein. And I thought, that's not, it's a Universal film, so it's possible, but it looks pretty low budget. So I thought, that's not going to play here. So I'm probably going to have to wait, to watch it at home. And that happens. Like, one of the movies that I most want to see, and we talked about this when we were sitting waiting for Godzilla to start, is it Poor Things? Is that what it's called? Which is another
Poor Things
story.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if that were playing in the theater here, I would have already seen it, but it's not. So it's, you know what I mean? It just seems like there's so much of the interesting it's frustrating because so many of the interesting movies, I would go to the movies a lot if there were more things that I wanted to see in the theater.
I'm looking at a list here of, like, just a Googled up top movies of 2023 to remind myself. Many of them, I haven't seen Oppenheimer. Many of them I haven't seen Killers of the Flower Moon. Look like foreign films that maybe I haven't. Boy and the Heron is on here. Spider-Man, Spider-Verse, the animated sequel. I
loved it.
I loved it as well. And I walked out of there shaking my head being like, I didn't have any expectation that movie was going to be as good as that was.
So
however,
again, blockbuster animated movie. So it's not like we're like, I just want to see indie art house movies,
But I do feel like this one edges it out for sort of technical points. Like, I think this is I think you have a certain leeway with animated films that you don't when you're making live action. I think you have more
Sure.
control over the image on the screen because you're literally creating every
You can do
aspect of
anything.
it. I think that's not a subtitled foreign language film. I think even the voice acting though is recognizable talent in Spider-Man. That's not the case
Mhm.
here. This is a Godzilla movie, which is a very specific thing, which for me was a challenge, right? So that's a sort of in the deficit. The $15
You're
million
probably
budget for
predisposed to
two.
kind of like Spider-Man, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's a sequel. I had seen and loved the first one, so I already went into it with good. And I think that if I had to compare the two and I had to vote, I would think that I'd have to give it to Godzilla simply because it's a coup in so many categories.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's not to say, I mean, by all means, folks, go see, or I guess it's streaming now. Watch that second Spider-Verse movie. It's
amazing.
great. It's so great. But it's a very different animal.
Sure. All right.
And I haven't seen a lot of the other ones on this list.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Fantastic.
You know, even with it
I'll
feels
forward you
like
this
more.
list. We should watch these movies.
Yeah, for sure. But that's the thing where even, you know, I used to watch most of the Oscar movies, and it's like I'll see the list and it's like some of these movies I haven't even heard of, you know.
Right.
So
Right.
So I think that's going to be that 2 thumbs up for us.
100%. Unequivocally.
So
unequivocally.
yeah, I mean, as I said, if this is still playing in the theater and you can get out to the theater to see it, do so. Because
Yeah,
I mean,
recommend it too.
see it on the biggest screen you possibly can. Because I definitely think, you know, it would still be great, but I definitely think even, you know, if you've got a 50 or 60 or 70 inch TV or whatever, it would lose something in terms of the action aspects.
Yeah, and I think this gets talked about with Denis Villeneuve's movies, but the concept of scope in film is something, you know, people think about the editing and the lighting and being able to convey epic scope is not a given, right? It's a challenge that I think when it's done well, it's so baked into the whoa feeling you have that you don't realize the technical challenges of creating that on a two-dimensional screen. You know, in Denis Villeneuve's Dune, the first part, there's a scene where they come running out and the entire shipyard is kind of being bombed from the sky. And it's a overwhelming, intense, beautifully shot, epic thing, but you really feel the scope of it, the size of the shipyards and the size of the ships and the distance, right? That's not a given. Like that's hard to achieve. And I think this movie is full of that too, particularly in the Godzilla sequences. And that's just, you know, one of those go big or go home. Like that's even more apparent on a giant screen like this. And it's you want a blockbuster movie, a Godzilla movie, a disaster movie, a kaiju movie. You want that scope. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Chris and Chris,
it in all.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely stuck the landing. Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com is our handle. We're on the socials. Like and subscribe. Leave us a comment. Thank you for listening / watching, whatever you're doing. We haven't talked. Have we decided what we're going to do next?
No, I had a couple. I don't know if you had any thoughts. I had a couple of suggestions. I watched Saltburn, which I think would be the two movies are very different from this one. But I watched Saltburn, which that's on a lot of lists of the best of 2023. I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff about that. Also, I've not seen this, but do you know the movie The Holdovers?
Well, that sounds familiar.
It is. Give me just 1 second, and I will bring it up here. I think it would be.
A good
another
one?
something fun to talk about. So it's Paul Giamatti.
Oh, yeah.
It
We could do that.
directed
Rachel
by.
wants to watch that one.
Okay, great. Directed by Alexander Payne, who did also with Paul Giamatti did Sideways and
Yeah.
Election, Nebraska. Yeah. So how about if we do that one for next? Because
We'll do
I
The
really want to see it
Holdovers
as well.
next. That's another new movie. So why don't you guys watch that and join us for our next episode when we discuss what we thought of it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're at time. Great episode. Always a pleasure. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
And unless you have anything else to add here at the end?
I
No?
think that is all.
Chris and I will talk to you all next week, baby.